Dynamic supply chains are a fact of life across industries. For electronics and high-tech companies, the stakes are high. Millions of components to manage, tight timelines, and a demand for innovation. To succeed, these companies need strategies and tools to effectively navigate supply chain disruptions. Hello, welcome to Wired In. I'm your host, Stephen Humphrey. On this episode, we're diving into supply chain, procurement, AI, and data management with my guest, Timon Ruban, founder and managing director at Luminovo. He has a wealth of knowledge in this space and is ready to share some critical insights and strategies to overcome supply chain challenges. Supply chain disruptions resulted in the high-tech industry losing an estimated $265 billion in growth opportunities. That is money that could have been invested in innovation, period. Today, we're joined by Timon Ruban, founding and managing director at Luminovo. Luminovo streamlines electronic supply chain quoting and procurement by unifying your data, processes, and partners in a single platform. Timon, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to Wired In.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephen. Glad to be here.
The old philosophy of garbage in equals garbage out, is that still true in the era of AI? And how is AI really helping companies cleanse and standardize their bill of material and help with supplier data management and real-time decision-making these days?
I wish it weren't a thing anymore. And you are right, AI can help, but the amount of messy bombs I still see every week is endless. And I think it'll be a long time coming till you can really get rid of that. But it is true, and I fully agree that AI can help with that. I can tell a little story to give an example from our own experience. So at Luminovo, we started building our first BOM importer, BOM scrubber, basically that takes these messy CSV and Excel files and tries to find all the right manufacturing part numbers, manufacturers, the designators, grouping the rows together. And this was in 2020, and we looked at AI a little bit, but ended up deciding the best way to do it is just to go the hard way, build rules, build heuristics, and we've been doing that for a couple of years. Every time we saw a new messy BOM that didn't work, we built a new rule. And it's here where AI really is a godsend. And so we've, a couple of months ago, started revamping that whole approach to use large language models, which are very good at interpreting any type of text and knowing whether it is an MPN or it is a manufacturer, without you having to write the exact rule of which semicolon and which comma needs to be split how. And so that's just one example where you can get rid of basically years of rules that we built up all in one go and replacing it with one API call to a large language model.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're absolutely right. There are so many different formats and structures and inputs to these systems today. And AI tools are just growing at such a rapid pace, right? It's like incredible to see what we're able to do with these tools. So, I'm really curious to hear more about how you and Luminovo are seeing manufacturers leveraging AI to help manage, structured and unstructured data between systems like PLM and MES and ERP and other tools like that in the enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can start by talking about, I think, the problem I'm most familiar with, which is cleaning bombs. And that's a little bit the heart of every supply chain is actually knowing which parts are on your BOM and which ones should you be negotiating, which ones do you need to check the life cycle and the prices. And a little bit the story of also how we approached this is that when we got started 5 years ago, we already looked into AI a little bit, how it could be helpful, ended up mostly deciding against it and building basically an expert system with 1,000 heuristics. And so it was many years of us of seeing some new BOM that doesn't adhere to the format that our rules can understand, and some edge case of how the MPNs and the manufacturers are put together across multiple columns with different separators. And we prided ourselves actually in building these hundreds and hundreds of heuristics and edge cases to be able to deal with very, very messy bombs. But I think now with large language models, who are very, very good at interpreting any kind of text, even if it's very industry-specific text like a bill of material, it's helped us completely revamp how we tackle cleaning bombs using large language models to be smarter and not having to have an edge case rule for every edge case, but kind of outsourcing that to a large language model.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I'd love to elaborate a little bit more on some real-world use cases you're seeing in your space. Specifically around connecting those, enterprise systems of record like ERP, PLM, MES, and how that really enables this, this unified digital thread that we're constantly trying to accomplish in this industry, right, in electronics and high tech. And then ultimately, how does AI support something like that, right?
When it comes to connecting all of these systems, one analogy that I really like is that of supply chain plumbing, which is really essential work. So you need someone to be your plumber and you need someone to do your plumbing. You might not want to do it yourself, but you need someone or a system that does that work for you. And so I think that's at the heart of what systems like Luminovo, also a PLM, do is they do that plumbing for you. They connect the messy data, and only if you've done that can you actually go to more interesting tasks of getting automated insights about your procurement, about costs and risks.
Yeah, and as a former engineer myself, having spent a lot of time in that world, I wanted to spend more time on designing and engineering and finding the right components that meet my design requirements and allocating those into the design appropriately, and less time around working with vendors and suppliers and sorting out, availability and capacity and lead times, and depending on the size of an organization, some of these organizations have dedicated procurement teams that's just all they do, right? And I'm sure those are the types of people that that are leveraging your software. So that's great. I mean, unifying those work streams, I think, is really important, right?
Looping back to that intersection between engineers and procurement and supply chain managers, I think one of the key insights I had as we spent more and more time at that intersection, at Luminovo, we always come from the procurement supply chain side, is that those two jobs are actually needed. So just like you said, Stephen, as an engineer, you don't actually want to be negotiating with suppliers, spending all of that time. And there used to be a time where I thought the best software world is that you have just one really powerful ECAD where you design and you get all your supply chain data in one place. But yeah, over time I realized this job of a procurement person is needed, and because it is, you have these intersections, and it's these intersections either between people or systems that create that messy data that makes it really, really challenging. And so it's these intersections that I think one needs to think about a lot, and where AI can help, either between two systems, transforming from one format to the other, or really between two people and like handing off that data.
Yeah, and here at PTC, we spend a lot of time thinking about that product data foundation and the importance of the accuracy, the cleanliness, the completeness of that data, right, and how it's going to be handed down to the next system, and then that system's going to take it and then transform it and do something else with it, right? But I think when we think about data and the extent of how much data is out there and how it's being used, what that, my mind immediately goes to, how can AI help in areas like predictive analytics, right, or demand forecasting, and taking inputs from engineering and operations and planning and procurement, and then factoring in things like geopolitical tensions and tariffs, and it becomes this really complicated morass of just like things to navigate for an organization. So maybe you could give your opinion there on how you guys handle stuff like that.
Yeah. So the little bit hot take that I have, because people often ask us about predictive analytics, of like, how can you forecast that mess that you have to deal with? My answer tends to be that you should try to think less about forecasting and really predicting future events, because especially in the real world, in the real supply chain, it's very hard to predict if a government suddenly decides to mess with the decision-making process of a chip manufacturer, as just happened with Nexperia in the Netherlands.
Sure. Yeah.
And so instead, if you can predict, if you just accept the fact that to some extent it's impossible to predict these really big movements, or if a ship gets stuck in the Panama Canal, it's those things that really create supply chain disruptions. Then what else can we do? And what else can we do is trying to just have very up-to-date, accurate data of what's going on right now, as well as looking back at trends. So that's the ambition that we have when we try to build things that help you look forward. Really what we're saying is, well, you've got to look backwards and at what's happening right now. One specific trick, I think that one senior procurement manager at one of our customers taught me, that he'll often look at lead time trends. So that's looking backwards for a specific part. How has the standard manufacturer lead time changed? Because that's a really good indication to know how the prices might develop. Because if the manufacturer lead times have been going up, which is a backward-looking thing, you're not really trying to predict anything, but you understand that there's a causal effect of supply and demand changing that has led to lead times going up, that will probably lead to prices going up as well. And so it's that type of, I guess you could still call it predictive analytics, but for me, this is always a little bit misleading because it carries with it the connotation of being able to look into the future, which is hard to do, but you can by looking backwards and looking at what's going on right now, still react much better to supply chain disruptions when they come up.
Right, so I mean, it's almost more like a proactive analytics to some extent, because so many of these organizations are in that reactive state, and they're all of a sudden looking at their inventory levels drawing down, and then they're seeing lead times going up, and they're like, well, we have to buy now because we have demand and we have to fulfill these quantities, versus, to your point, looking proactively and using AI to say, well, we know there's a high likelihood demand will stay flat or maybe go up, and we see prices or lead times going in a direction we don't necessarily want. So when that price does come down, even though we might have sufficient inventory, let's just go ahead and buy now because we know we're going to need it and consume it anyway. And that could save several $100,000 for a project or something, right?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. So it's exactly this. I like your reactive to proactive. I think that's the better mental model to think about what you want to achieve. And that ties in with everything we've discussed earlier of how can you achieve that? Well, you can only be proactive if you have all the data that's relevant in one place so that you can run analytics on it and constantly monitor, have a system monitoring your changes in your BOM, changes in the life cycle, changes in lead time, changes in price, and surface that to you so that you can act on the most important cost-saving opportunities or the most biggest risks that might be out there in your supply chain.
Yeah, great. So we've talked a lot about this proactive approach, right? But in an ideal world, that's how everyone's operating, right? But the reality is, customers are probably somewhere in the middle or on the lower end of the spectrum. So let's assume, for sake of argument, that you don't have the ability to take that approach. So kind of what the status quo is today for companies, and maybe where they're leaving money on the table, or where they're not optimizing their operations or being as efficient as they could be, and how do tools like Luminovo help deal with some of that on a day-to-day basis?
I think the simplest example that I can give to you that is also one of the most impactful ones that you see, especially with companies, they don't even have a PLM. All their BOMs are really just flying around with Excel between their engineers and their procurement team. All the pricing that they negotiate is flying around with Excel sheets. Is the topic of demand aggregation. That's a simple first one where you're really missing out on like the easiest, basically cost savings. Because if you just properly across your 100 products that you have in your portfolio, if you're not aggregating those demands, it's a very, very obvious cost-saving opportunity that you're missing. And to aggregate demand is actually not that easy if you only have Excels to work with, because in the end, you need to know exactly the MPN and the manufacturer. And that's where I think it's this combination of having a very clean BOM management system like a PLM. And if you combine that then with a system like Luminovo that is all about cost insights, risk insights for those parts. Yeah, that's one of this, I think, most obvious examples that we have with customers that come in to us is that's just like, just start aggregating those demands and negotiating with those.
Right. Just the first principles, like get this problem solved out of the gate, right? Yeah. Like low-hanging fruit. Yeah, I mean, I would add on top of that with tools like PLM, right? And from like when we look at companies from a maturity perspective that maybe don't have robust change control in place, and they don't have those BOMs in a system like a PLM, then they're missing out on the capability to do things like effectivity and disposition analysis appropriately based on inventory levels and what's work in process, what's on order, what's on hand, what's in transit. Things which the procurement side of the fence obviously would have visibility to and participating in that kind of work. So then you end up buying too much of a component or not buying enough, or an engineer changes the design and all of a sudden you have all this inventory that's no longer relevant and you can no longer use, therefore you have to scrap it. So I think at a high level, there's some really low-hanging fruit here that these kinds of tools can just come right in and solve pretty easily for some of these companies.
And the ceiling is so high, right? So I think that's why I'm very excited about this space, because this demand aggregation topic, or just properly knowing all your part alternates in a good PLM system, that's to some degree static. I mean, your demand forecasts change, so it's not actually static, but that's actually a process you can do by hand if you really want to. So some people do it with Excel, and a week aggregating, trying to do it for their most expensive parts. Usually that's where they'll do that extra effort. But once you have everything connected and you have a system that knows all your parts, knows when they're changed, is constantly monitoring lifecycle, compliance, price, stock, lead time data in the market for you, you can start looking at insights that would never, ever be possible to do by hand. Because if you have 10,000 parts you need to manage, you cannot look up every day the prices, even the list prices on the market for those 10,000 parts. Sure. But your systems, if you have that clean connected data, can do that for you, and can do then many more, actually not so complicated once it's connected, types of analytics, like looking at price, lead time, stock level changes, and notifying you about those to give you, again, that reactive to proactive mindset of when to negotiate with your supplier, of when to do risk buys because your demand versus the stock levels in the market aren't looking too good.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, Timon, thank you so much for your perspective today. I just want to do a quick wrap up and some of the key takeaways from our conversation, right? So we talked a bit about how AI can help with, data cleanliness and BOM preparation and really improving your supplier data kind of foundation. We talked a bit about strategies around systems of record with ERP, PLM, MES, and that kind of unified digital thread, and where tools like Luminovo can pull maybe the engineering data closer to procurement and vice versa to ensure that there's not that messy handoff, just living in an Excel spreadsheet, right? Yeah. And then last but not least, these kind of practical insights that we're seeing, from leading companies out there, particularly companies that are using these strategies and going from that, reactive to proactive type of approach, and how they get there, right? So I think it's a really exciting time to be in the space, and I really appreciate your time today for the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Additional links about Luminovo and their product can be found in the description below. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button to stay wired in, and we'll see you next time.